Support comes from St. Louis Public Library Foundation, helping the library serve children and their families with programs and services needed to become lifelong readers. More information about the foundation is at slpl.org.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. The bio page on writer Colson Whitehead's website starts with where he was born and raised. It includes what he did after college. Then 3 sentences in, we get to Whitehead's books and accolades. I'm talking a lot of them. Best lists, short lists, finalists. Among top honors are 2 Pulitzer Prizes in fiction. The first for the Underground Railroad in 2017, the second for The Nickel Boys in 2020. It's now April 2025, and Whitehead is in St. Louis to add another prize to his bio, the 2025 St. Louis Literary Award from the St. Louis University Libraries. Past recipients of the award, whom we've had the pleasure of talking with as guests on this show, include Margaret Atwood, Zadie Smith, and Stephen Sondheim, as well as last year's winner, Jamaica Kincaid. And this year's winner joins us now. Colson Whitehead, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Howdy do. Thanks for having me.
We are very happy to have you. And there's a lot of excitement, actually, among my colleagues. I heard them saying hello to you earlier. Now, Colson, you began your writing career writing about television, books, and music at the Village Voice. How is it that got started?
Well, I grew up in New York City and always would rush to buy the Village Voice every Wednesday to see what bands were playing. You know, are the Butthole Surfers coming through, or Husker Du? And then, started reading the art section. And I loved the critics who would write about books one week and then music the next and then film. And so, I lucked out into a job there, and that was really my training as a writer, writing once or twice a month and then 3 times a month for different sections, having to get my work in so I get paid. Mm-hmm. It's a good discipline when you're not going to eat if you don't put your butt in a chair for 5 hours. So
right.
I carried over to my present job.
Mm-hmm. So at what point was it then that you turned your energies to fiction in that, I'm going to make a living doing this kind of energy? Yeah,
well, I wanted to be a writer of fiction from when I was a little kid. I loved when I was 10 or 11 reading Stephen King novels and X-Men, Spider-Man. And so it seemed like from a very young age that making up stories about werewolves and vampires and superheroes would be a cool job. So after being a freelance writer for a couple of years, I got the confidence to start working on my fiction. Mm-hmm. I remember being like, I'm 24. If I don't do it now, when will I do it? Which, looking back, was ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Was there something that you needed to really take that first step forward? Was there, one bit of fiction that you wrote that gave you that sense that you were ready to go?
Well, I wanted to write from an early age, but I think what pushed me finally and faithfully into being a writer was my first book not selling. I wrote a novel. No one liked it. I got rejected by 25 people, and my agent dumped me. And I think realizing that, I was not going to get a real job. I'm really only a misshapen monster who can only be made whole by writing. I should probably just start again. Mm-hmm. And the next book may sell. It may not, but I'll be a better writer for having written 2 books. Mm-hmm. And then maybe I'll write a 3rd book, and that one won't sell, but I'll be a better writer for having done it. So I think committing to the bit, to the lifestyle, it really made me a writer.
Mm-hmm. So I want to fast forward and make sure that we get to the reason that you have come in town, and that is the St. Louis Literary Award. And the book that this school year St. Louis University students, faculty, and staff read is your 2016 novel, The Underground Railroad. And just as a quick summary for those who are not familiar with it, The Underground Railroad tells the story of Cora, who's a woman born into slavery on a Georgia plantation. She takes a literal underground railroad to run away and eventually reach the West across several southern states. Cora is pursued all the way by a slave catcher named Ridgway, and his obsession with capturing Cora traces back to his failure years past to catch Cora's runaway mother, Mabel. How did I do with that?
Pretty good. I mean, it sounds familiar.
Yeah. So the timing, at the time, what was happening, Colson, at the time you were writing The Underground Railroad, and did that affect how you wrote your characters and what they were experiencing?
Well, looking back, I was writing it in 2015, which, considering all the craziness in the world now or in the country, seems like a very peaceful period. So I can't say I was writing about America about contemporary America when I was writing the book or thinking about it. But obviously there's overlap. You mentioned Ridgway, the slave catcher, and if you read accounts from enslaved people at that time, the way they talk about being stopped by slave catchers, you have to show your ID or else you'll be rounded up, is the same language that is used now when young people talk about being rousted by white policemen, black people by white policemen. So it came out in 2016, and a lot of the book was about white supremacy and the villainy of white supremacists. And then a couple of months later, we actually elected a white supremacist. So it turns out if you write about racial hatred in the past, you end up writing about racial hatred in the present.
Mm-hmm. So you'd mentioned the date of publication. The award of the Pulitzer Prize in fiction came in 2017, so a year after the book came out. I mean, do you then think that the way that the book was received really does have to do with the time it was released to the world?
No, I mean, it came out before, we had this sort of horrible person in the presidency, and all the sort of good things about its reception by critics and audience came out before then. I'm glad that people have received it in the way they have.
Mm-hmm. So this is now about 12 years since the time you started writing the book?
Yeah, I
started
started 12-15, so
yeah.
2015, so 10 years.
In that time, I mean, you've been talking with many people, including students, about the book. Is there anything that they have asked or observed that has helped you to understand what it means for people, even all these years after the book first came out?
Well, I mean, I think audiences are strange. For me, I'm always just doing the best job I can with the work, not trying to let down my ambitions for the work. So it's always a mystery when people respond to this book or not that book. So I wrote the first time I was in St. Louis was in 2014. I had written the book about the World Series of Poker. Mm-hmm. I had a reading at Left Bank Books, and I remember that like 4 people showed up. They were doing construction outside on the sidewalk, and there was like a jackhammer going on when I was talking.
Gosh.
And I remember being like, what is this job? I write these books. I love the book. It's called The Noble Hustle. And for me, it's just as good as The Underground Railroad. Mm-hmm. I can't account for why people like this book and not the other book. And of course, when I came to St. Louis with Underground Railroad, there were more than four people there.
Oh, sure.
So I just always try to do my best, and I can't account for how the audience will take it.
Mm-hmm. When you were writing, at any point, whether it was with the Underground Railroad or other things that you wrote, I mean, were you thinking about an accolade like the Pulitzer Prize?
Oh, it was so beyond me, definitely. I mean, I think, I've written so many different oddball books that, definitely before the Pulitzer Prize, I thought it was lucky that it was being published and lucky to have whatever kind of readers. So obviously it was life-changing, and, I definitely was not thinking about it. It changed my life. I was in a good mood for a year after that.
Yeah, sure.
Usually kind of a bad mood, moping around the house. But I did manage to engineer a smile a little more often for a year.
You said earlier that audiences are strange. What did you mean by that?
Oh, more just like they're other people. Why do they like this book and not that book? Because I do change genres a lot.
Yes.
I have a zombie apocalypse novel. I have a coming-of-age novel. I'm writing a crime trilogy now. I'm always gaining and losing readers. Some people don't want to read about poker. Some people do want to read a historical novel. So again, they're other people and unknowable.
Yeah. And before we go to a break, I do want to know, without giving away too much, in the edition of the Underground Railroad that I read, in almost the last page, St. Louis and Missouri, they make an appearance there. What does that mean? How is Missouri and St. Louis relevant?
Well, I'm not going to say which characters end up getting off the plantation and getting 1,000 miles away, but it was the gateway to the West, and so one part of the American story ends at St. Louis, and then the great Western frontier opens up in that 19th century period. So that is where I'll just say, that's where we leave our characters on the precipice of this new territory.
Are you expecting any questions about that when you talk with people here in St. Louis?
It didn't occur to me. I make a lot of references to different places.
Right.
But I'm prepared now.
Yeah. We need to take a quick break. We'll be back shortly to continue this conversation with two-time Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist and 2025 St. Louis Literary Award recipient Colson Whitehead. Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. Let's return to our conversation with Colson Whitehead, two-time Pulitzer Prize-winning author and recipient of the 2025 St. Louis Literary Award from the St. Louis University Libraries. Colson, before the break, we were talking a little bit about the book you wrote about poker. And earlier this week, you talked with St. Louis Magazine, and you had said, quote, "Whenever I write about something really deeply, I'm really sick of it." Now, the context here is important to note. You were responding to a question about poker, which is a very different subject than what you've written about in the Underground Railroad. So how is it that you've kept up talking about this book, the characters? What's your level of enthusiasm in talking about the Underground Railroad?
Oh, well, all these books are, snapshots of who I was at a certain moment, and The Noble Hustle, its conception and creation is, who I was 12 years ago. Underground Railroad captures another part of my life. And so whether I'm talking about my first book or my most recent book, I'm really talking about who I am as a person and as an artist, and 25 years in, I'm very glad that this or that book has an audience and people still want to bring me in and for me to jibber jabber about them.
So one of the things that we talked about in the break between is about what you're working on right now, and as I understand, the next book that you wrote or were working on was not the next one that you published, right?
Well, yeah, I had two ideas for a book after Underground Railroad, and one was a heist novel, which seemed very fun, and the other one was The Nickel Boys, a story based on a real-life, very repressive, brutal reform school. And so I was, it was time for me to get back to work, and definitely it would have been more fun to do a heist book with some jokes and coming up with capers. But the Nickel Boys seem more compelling, so I did two sort of heavy books back to back, which is rare for me.
Mm-hmm. So shifting gears, why did you do that at that point?
Well, there's a new administration in the White House. And I had to reconcile my ideas about optimism and pessimism. Should I be hopeful about where the country's going, or maybe more clear-eyed? And so Nickel Boys has two young teenage boys who, and one is optimistic and thinks that the world can change if you fight, and the other one is more cynical and survival-oriented. So at that moment in our country's history and in my life, reconciling my own philosophical argument made more sense than writing a heist novel.
Now, I'd mentioned earlier that my colleagues were very excited that you were coming in. One of them is Andrea Henderson, and she is STLPR's race identity and culture reporter. And she was wondering whether when you were researching the Dozier School, if you came across others similar, either in the South or anywhere else in the country. And with the film that was released just last fall, at the end of the film, the director, Ramel, his last name is escaping me. Ramel Ross. He seems to suggest that there are others that were like Dozier and Nickel Academy, which you wrote about. What did you find?
Well, yeah, so Dozier School, reform school for boys. Kids were abused, assaulted, and murdered. And I think one of the things that kept me wedded to the idea was that if there is one place, there must be other places. And definitely traveling with the book, I'd be in Ireland, and people would say, oh, this reminds me of the Magdalene Laundries, these schools for unwed mothers, and the same sort of abuse has happened. I'd go to Canada and say, oh, this reminds me of the residential schools where they took Indigenous children from their families to educate them in white culture, and the same sort of abuse has happened, or Australia. So any place, any time where powerful people can get off and scot-free from abusing the weak and the powerless, these things happen. So Dozier is not an isolated case, and that kind of brutality is not an isolated incident.
I'm glad to hear you talk about that, partly because in the context of the Underground Railroad, the number of languages that book has been translated into, and how people can relate to what is there, even if they have not been part of American history per se.
No, yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about audiences and what can we expect from them. When I was writing The Underground Railroad, I did not expect that in Poland, people would say, oh, this reminds me of the Polish resistance against the Nazis. You're hiding people, trying to get them to a place of safety. In France, this reminds me of the French resistance. And so, unfortunately, the war, the battle between the powerful and the powerless is not confined to one culture or country or time. It's timeless and part of who we are as human beings.
Right. Human depravity is everywhere. Yeah. We had another question that came from our environment reporter, Kate Grumke, and she really enjoyed the film. She's wondering about Nickel Boys and whether you knew that it was going to be taken like a first-person perspective, and what you thought about that.
Yeah, there have been two adaptations of my work, and in both cases I was not involved. I was doing other stuff, and happy to give it off to these talented filmmakers. So I'm glad that Nickel Boys has found like an audience outside of the book readers. For me, it's always, I think, more healthy to step away and let the book be the book and the movie be the movie.
But it is kind of a gateway, isn't it, for people to see the film and then find their way to the book?
Oh, sure. I'm always like one of those weird nerds who is like, oh, Scorsese's writing a book about doing a movie about this book, and then I'll get the book like Dennis Lehane or something. And,
yeah.
So definitely, when I hear about a filmmaker I love adapting a book, I'm always like, oh, I guess I'll check it out before the movie comes out so I can be prepared.
Right. Well, and on that note about adaptations, we talked earlier about how you started your writing career and you were covering television and books. And as you noted, the Underground Railroad and the Nickel Boys have been adapted for small and big screen. to your writing process, I mean, do you see characters, doing and being as you would in a film, for example?
Oh, it's really odd. That's a good question because I think I am a visual writer. I'm trying to see what the characters are seeing and getting on the page. But then when it comes to like important details, like their faces, I never see their faces. Like and if you go through my books, I'm rarely describing faces. I find it tedious and not part of who they are. So I remember seeing the Underground Railroad adaptation. I never thought about what Cora, the main character, looks like. But then she comes on screen. I was like, oh, that is Cora. It was really magical to experience the book in this way. They cast it in a way that seemed so perfect to me. So all these people who were faceless in my mind suddenly had faces, and it was really magical.
Mm-hmm. Would you say then that in describing your characters, you're not going into what they look like, but how they interact with one another?
Well, there's that, and also who they are, their personalities, and their psychology. So that stuff all comes first before I'm like putting them down on the page. Mm-hmm. I've thought about who they are and what they do for months and months, or maybe years, before they appear on the page. And at that point, I have to have some physical details, but it's always not as important to me.
Mm-hmm. There's also a part in the Underground Railroad, the Museum of Natural Wonders. And when I was reading that, I was responding aloud with expletives. It was just so vivid. I have not seen either adaptations of the Nickel Boys or the Underground Railroad, but in what you're writing now, which is the Harlem Trilogy, how much are you thinking about how it might translate onto a screen?
Right, that's not up to me. Again, I am a visual writer, so I am seeing the cars and the clothes and the street signs in this trilogy. That's about New York in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And for me to be grounded, I have to know what the clothes are like and the cars look like. But adaptation is something very different. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't enter into when I'm at my desk.
Mm-hmm. Are you hoping that maybe Zone 1 will be taken up? This is a question that came from Philip on Facebook.
Oh, Zone 1 is a zombie apocalypse novel, and it'd be cool if somebody had some sort of vision for it. I wrote it because I was a horror fan growing up, and I saw Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead at a very young age. I was probably too young to have seen them.
Okay.
And for decades, I had zombie anxiety dreams for like every month, and one dream became the inspiration for Zone 1. So it's nice to see someone take up the story and put it on the screen. Sure.
Mm-hmm. And as we finish up here, you will be going to talk with students at Cardinal Ritter High School after we've had our conversation here. What is it that you hope to impart to them?
Well, yeah, again, talking about audience, if there's one weirdo in the audience who's like, who's this freak coming to our school? If he can become a writer, I can become a writer. If I can inspire the weirdos, the hopeless, and the misfits, that's a good day's job for me.
Mm-hmm. So is being a writer really the measure of success for you?
Being the best writer I can be is if I'm fulfilling my ambitions for a project and not slacking off and writing the best book I can do when I'm 28, at 45, now 55, then that's a job well done.
Well, Colson, we look forward to especially the third part of your Harlem Trilogy, which is coming out soon.
I got to finish it first.
Okay. Colson Whitehead is the author of Pulitzer Prize-winning novels The Underground Railroad and The Nickel Boys. He's also the 2025 recipient of the St. Louis Literary Award. Tonight, he will receive that literary award. You can grab some tickets still. There are a limited number remaining, and that ceremony will be held at the Sheldon Concert Hall. You can also register to join virtually, and I believe you will also be doing a craft talk.
A craft talk tomorrow, Thursday, 11 a.m.
Thank you again, Colson.
Sure.
This episode was produced by Elaine Shaw. Our audio engineer is Aaron Dorr. This podcast was mixed and edited by Aaron.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.